Okay, well, everybody, it's time to reconvene today's meeting. We're going straight into item 7. It's first to the former predetermination hearings that we had. First one is development of land for residential use, landscaping and open space at Rufflands Farm, Mill Road, Carnshaw, Falkirk for QE for Taylor Wimpey UK Limited. It's pages 85 to 116 on your agenda papers. And our report is by Catherine Chorley, but before Catherine comes in, just to say that there's a deputation request being submitted by the agent, Mr Colin Laverty. So we'll agree or disagree to hearing Mr Laverty right now. I'm quite agreeable to hearing him. Everybody agreed? Okay, fine, that's fine, thank you. That takes us then to our officer, which will be Catherine, for the report. Thank you, Catherine.
Thanks, Gavina. It will be myself and Alistair who will be talking today.
Fine.
Gemma, I wonder if you can open up the indicative site plan for me, please. This is an application for planning permission in principle. So the layout that you can see before you is indicative and isn't a finalised design, as is standard for planning permission in principles. I'm also aware that the report is extremely long and that you will have all read it. So bearing in this in mind, I'm just going to pick out some key facts. The land of this application site is located in the Greenbelt and is designated as countryside. The site is not allocated in the development plan for housing development, but it's not a particularly new site to us. We have a history on this site of submissions to previous local development plans, and that's really detailed in section 3 of the report and dates back to 2003. The most recent examination for LDP2, the reporter stated that there was no overriding reason to support allocation of the site. He stated that extending the urban area eastward into the undeveloped agricultural land would work against the Greenbelt's purpose of protecting the landscape setting of this settlement. Its allocation would undermine, the spatial strategy for Larbert and Stenhousemuir. We've sat here, me, my colleagues, yourselves a number of times over the last few years to discuss 5-year housing land supply, shortage of housing provision. And this was all to do with policy HC01 in our local development plan and Scottish planning policy. These are no longer considerations in our assessment of these applications. We're moving away from this idea of a shortfall in housing, and part of that is a result of the Moss End Farm appeal, which I'll ask Alistair to give a brief update on.
Thanks.
Alistair, you just tell us who you are and what your designation is.
Yeah, so my name's Alistair Shaw. I'm Development Plan Coordinator, so dealing with planning policy matters.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to follow on from what Catherine said, intention is just to provide some further brief explanation on the changes which have been happening to housing planning policy with the introduction of NPF 4, National Planning Framework 4, which have been clarified through this Moss End Court of Session decision last year. So members will maybe recall that under the previous Scottish Government policy, which was reflected in LDP policy HC01, there was a requirement to maintain a 5-year supply of effective housing land. And in the event of a shortfall in that 5-year supply, there was a so-called exceptions provision, which meant that basically under policy at HC01, we could allow sites not allocated in the LDP to be supported where they were considered to constitute sustainable development. So it was an exceptions policy where there was a shortfall in the 5-year land supply, housing land supply. So with the adoption of NPF 4, National Planning Framework 4, in February 2023, policy 16 of National Planning Framework 4 has removed the concept of the 5-year effective land supply and the requirement to maintain such a supply. And there's now a stronger emphasis on allocated plan-led sites, and land that's not allocated for housing in the LDP is only allowed in very limited circumstances. And within policy 16, it's section F is the critical one that sets out those limited circumstances, and these are referred to in the report. But in particular, that section F introduces the concept of a deliverable housing land pipeline, and that's to be established in LDP delivery programmes. And what it does is it provides a view on the phasing of housing allocations in the plan. Now, this part of the policy F, is designed to facilitate the bringing forward of additional sites only in circumstances where the speed of delivery of existing sites is substantially faster than what's anticipated in the housing land pipeline, and that's with reference to the housing land audit. And certainly evidence from current and recent housing land audits in this area indicates that this situation doesn't prevail at the present time here. So the essence of the Moss End judicial review is that Miller Homes advanced the view that policy 16 was inoperable, couldn't be operated until until new style local development plans were in place. And that in the meantime, those old exceptions policies in LDPs should continue to be used. And the Court of Session ruling was really that didn't accept that interpretation and confirmed that those exceptions policies are no longer applicable. So as such, NPF 4 policy 16 is the relevant policy to apply, and section F, as I said, is the bit of the policy that is relevant to non-allocated sites. So that old LDP policy 8C01 it's not considered compatible with policy 16 in NPF 4, and as such is treated as superseded.
Thanks, Alistair. So as Alistair says, the focus is really on policy 16 in NPF 4, which is where we look when sites are not allocated in the local development plan. The criteria are set out and we've assessed them, and it is our view that the scheme fails to comply with part 16, part 3, F of this policy, amongst other policies and sections of that document. The site fails the policy requirements in relation to housing, greenbelt, countryside and rural development. It fails the policy requirements in relation to climate change and the nature crisis. Our LDP is not out of date. We have a healthy housing land supply. We have sites which are coming forward and have been approved, for example, Gilston and Crawfield Road. Our LDP can be shown to be delivering housing. Colleagues are also moving quickly to get out the call for sites for LDP 3, and there remain sites which are allocated in the local plan which can still come forwards for development. On that basis, the development before you here is not considered to be policy compliant. There are material considerations which have been submitted by the applicant, and these are set out in the report. It needs to be clear that there's a specific move away from the previous policy position of releasing unallocated land for housing and disagreeing or contemplating disagreements on housing numbers. Instead, the focus is really on stored sites and ensuring that homes are built in planned locations which better meet the needs of the people. Just to give you some sort of background to that, there's over 3,000 consented units in Falkirk that can come forward for development. So really NPF 4 is about strengthening a plan-led approach. Any future expansion in the area or review of the Greenbelt needs to be done in a plan-led fashion, allowing a comprehensive rather than piecemeal view to be taken of infrastructure, landscape and planning considerations. For that reason, the application is recommended for refusal, and we would ask that policy 16 be added as a reason to refuse the application on reason 1. During the PDH, Councillor Sinclair asked a question in relation to additional support needs, which we weren't able to answer at the time, but we have that answer for you now if you'd like to hear it. Yeah, thanks, convener. So Councillor Sinclair asked about additional support needs capacity in the area and the impact on additional support needs as a result of this development. Children's Services have come back to say that the developer contribution policy in SG 13 only covers mainstream school capacity. This is because the impact of small to medium housing developments and incremental housing growth such as this proposal on additional support needs capacity is difficult to quantify. We're currently considering how the policy could be amended to incorporate this with respect to major strategic growth, where the impact on ASN school capacity will be more clearly measurable. So if it came forward through the local development plan, that is something that you would take into consideration as an allocated site. That's it from me, convener. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for that submission. Thank you. It's now an opportunity for the agent to step forward. Oh, I should have put the plural in there, agents. Now, there's three of you here. First of all, we'd just like you to introduce yourselves, tell us what your designations are, and then you have 10 minutes between the three of you to put your submission forward, and then there'll be an opportunity for members to ask any questions. So first of all, introductions, please.
Hi, good afternoon. I am Philip Cooper, Land and Planning Director for Taylor-Wimpey.
Hi, my name is Colin Lavetti. I work for Stantec. I'm the planning agent for the application.
Good afternoon and thank you, convener. My name's Naomi Cunningham. I'm the Senior Strategic Land and Planning Manager from Taylor-Wimpey, and I'm going to make a short presentation today, and then we can answer any questions that you may have. Firstly, we understand that the case officer's reasons for refusal are based on the fact that the site's within the green belt and it's not specifically allocated for housing. So we wish to take 10 minutes today to outline to you why we think this application should be approved today and why it can contribute meaningfully to Falkirk's ambitions for economic growth, social justice and placemaking. This is an opportunity for you to support a new development that will provide much needed jobs and skills along with new and affordable family homes. The Scottish Government have recently issued guidance stating that they expect to see an emergency-led focus on decision-making in planning applications. This should be considered a significant material consideration. We are one of the largest residential developers in Scotland, and each year we build around 1,500 new homes, with 25% of them being affordable. We're a 5-star house builder, and we consistently gain recognition for the quality of our homes and our developments. In 2024, we won no less than 10 quality awards from NHBC, which is the highest of any other house builder, and the coveted Regional Award for Scotland. We see the significant investment that's been brought to Falkirk through the city deals and the vision being driven by your leadership team at Falkirk Council. We think we're well placed to help support this growth by working with you to bolster jobs and apprenticeships through new high-quality housing developments. Our proposal is for the delivery of 150 homes, including 37 affordable at Roughlands Farm. We would like to make clear that these affordable homes will be houses and not flats, providing good quality family accommodation. The site is sustainable and supports the principles of a 20-minute neighbourhood. It's within walking distance of key facilities, including local schools, public transport connections, public parks and shops. Accessibility of the site will be further enhanced through new walking and cycling path proposed along the northern boundary and also a new pedestrian link to the south connecting to the core path. There are significant areas of open space proposed within the development, totalling 1.6 hectares, which is over 33% of the site area. This open space will be maintained by a factor and there'll be no burden placed on Falkirk Council for its maintenance. Our landscape strategy will create a robust, accessible and defensible boundary edge to the settlement. It'll deliver usable open spaces, including a range of play and recreational areas. It'll also create linked wildlife network corridors across the site. The proposals will create a more robust greenbelt boundary, and as acknowledged by previous LDP examination reporters, could be seen as a rounding off of the settlement. I'll speak a bit more about this later on. Our proposal will bring key economic benefits to the area. The economic benefits statement shown in front of you shows that the development could support 235 jobs directly during the construction period and a further 110 supply chain jobs. A number of direct and indirect apprenticeships will also be created. We're fully committed to working with you as a council to ensure that the jobs created are local ones, and we will play our role with younger people through careers fairs and school visits. New residents on average spend approximately £5,500 in the local area within the first 18 months of moving into a new home to make their house feel like a home. We estimate that the development could support approximately £825,000 of first occupation expenditure. Year on year, residents from this development would be estimated to spend around £1.4 million locally, which will bring investment to Falkirk and the surrounding area, which will support further jobs, services, skills and existing community facilities. This would be in addition to the council tax revenues of around £265,000 paid per annum. As demonstrated in the energy statement that we submitted with the application, we are committed to building greener, healthier homes for all. Our house types include sustainable design features, including energy efficient walls and windows and insulated loft spaces. This reduces running costs for our customers and helps cut carbon emissions. All of our homes will be zero gas. They'll be heated by air source heat pumps, and if this application is approved, it could be the first gas-free housing development in Falkirk, something which you could be proud of. The case officer's recommendations to refuse the application appear to be based on the fact that the site is within the green belt and it's not allocated for housing in the adopted local development plan. We absolutely support a plan-led system, but it's within your gift as elected members to support growth and small departures from the plan, such as this, and bring meaningful economic and social benefits, which will help support Falkirk's growth ambitions. I would emphasise that the adopted LDP was adopted in 2020 under previous planning legislation, and it was intended to be a 5-year plan expiring later this year. The emerging LDP is currently being prepared and is not expected to be adopted until 2027 at the earliest, with the delivery of sites that are allocated in that plan probably taking around a 2-year minimum for them to deliver following the adoption. So from 2029 at the earliest, leaving a policy gap. Since the adopted local plan was approved, the national housing emergency has been declared. Recent independent research from Diffley Partnership and RETI estimates that around 32% of households in Falkirk are in some form of housing need, equating to a gross figure of over 23,000 homes. The Scottish Government issued guidance last year advising that they expect an emergency-led focus on decision-making on planning applications. Planning decisions remain a matter of planning judgment, and conflicts between policies are expected. Aside from the Greenbelt policy and NPF4's presumption against approving non-allocated sites, the proposals actually comply with the development plan. The release of the site from the Greenbelt has previously been supported by 3 sets of Scottish Government examination reporters. In 2010, reporters recommended that it was removed, allowing it to be considered as a development option beyond 2020. In 2015, the reporters determined that it had some logic as a development opportunity. And in 2020, reporters acknowledged that it could be considered a rounding off of development in the local area, and there may be some logic for its future release. At the time of the last LDP examination, there was no need to allocate the site for housing land requirement purposes. However, we have now had a national housing emergency declared, and that context has now changed. The site is not prime agricultural land, and our proposals are technically deliverable. The third recommendation for refusal states that granting this application today would make it difficult to resist other applications and would result in strategic unplanned growth. However, as you're aware, each application should be considered individually on its own merits, and you have the opportunity today to determine this application positively. We appreciate other housing applications are being considered. However, not all of these applications are equal. Rather than seek to develop a physically isolated site, our proposals for Roughlands would deliver a natural infill and rounding off of the settlement. The release of the site from the Greenbelt has previously been supported by LDP examination reporters. It's of a scale that, whilst making a meaningful impact to local housing supply, would not prejudice the spatial strategy for the wider area. Unlike other sites, Roughlands is in the control of a national house builder, and we are committed to delivering high quality new homes, including affordable, on this site as soon as we can. The planning applications received 113 public representations. However, as noted at the predetermination hearing, many of these were received from respondents out with your council area. In terms of education impact, your education service have not objected to the proposal, subject to developer contributions to Larbert Academy and to nursery provision. Similarly, NHF Forth Valley have not objected to the application, subject to developer contributions to increase capacity at local medical centres. In total, the developer contributions for the proposed development would equate to nearly £1 million, and that's in addition to the economic benefits that I mentioned earlier. You will note that the application has no statutory objections that cannot be dealt with by condition. In fact, there is only one consultee objection from Transport Planning. This is in relation to the footpath link proposed to the south of the site towards the core path. We are fully committed to delivering this path. The case officers have confirmed that they agree that we have done all we can to demonstrate that this link can be delivered, and we understand that they are satisfied that this matter is capable of being conditioned and addressed at the detailed design stage. In addition to a condition relating to the footpath, if you are minded to grant permission today, we would be happy to accept conditions limiting the height of the development to 2.5 stories to address design concerns raised by members of the public. We would also be happy to accept a condition relating to the provision of an employment statement showing how we plan to contribute to local jobs. Yeah, so I was actually just about to conclude, just to say that we respectfully request that you take this opportunity to grant planning permission in principle today for this much needed new housing development. Roughlands is an ideal opportunity to provide 150 energy efficient new homes, including 37 affordable, in a part of Falkirk that has proven market demand. The proposal will generate significant economic and social benefits. The site is deliverable, it's got no technical constraints, and there's a national housing emergency. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for your submission, and very timorous as well. Just within the 10 minutes there. Thank you very much. Okay then, members here and online, it's an opportunity now to ask questions of any of the individuals that are representing Taylor Wimpey at the moment. So open it up at the moment. Yes, Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Convener. Naomi, can I say a very good presentation, except for Larbert High, not Academy. I appreciate the presentation that's been made. I understand where it is. I understand, I've been known as a commercial manager to use figures which work for me. And I appreciate the jobs, but those 345 jobs won't, I'm assuming, won't all be local. They'll come from contractors from all over. The 32% housing in need one is an interesting fact. That's a new one that's been brought up recently. Can you give me a breakdown of what that 32% is? Because it's a kind of open statement, housing needs. So if you can possibly have that. I know that, and I've seen something a long time ago where there was retainers put on a number of land between the Hillikin site and Cairnshore. You may not want to answer this because it may be commercially confidential, but I don't know if you've get any retainers in any other sections of the land in that area. It'd be interesting to know if you did. If it's commercially confidential, I totally understand. If you can answer those to start with.
The Retties and Diffley partnership, the 23,000 homes that are in some form of need, that was primary research instructed by Homes for Scotland last year. There's a full report that's been circulated to your officers, and that has been primary research to specific people living within the council area. just contacting them, finding out what level of need they're in. That figure then needs to be drilled down into housing requirement, and that work's currently ongoing at the moment.
I presume that need can be very, very minor up to extreme need.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's what I was getting at. I don't think it's 23% of people, or sorry, 32% of people in Falkirk all need to move tomorrow. It's I say that's is a number. I think you'd nodded on the labour bit. I'm sure you want to answer that.
Yes, certainly. So I'll pick up. I think it's important to note as well that there was a comment around the 5-year housing land supply requirement being removed through NPF4. That doesn't mean that the housing need has been removed as well. So the housing need is still there. It's just the policy there has been amended. But it's important to note that there is still a housing need in Falkirk and across Scotland as well. Just on the jobs, you're entirely right. The figures there are jobs that have been supported by this development. That might not necessarily be in Falkirk, that could be elsewhere. What we have suggested is that we provide a report as part of the conditions, if this was to be consented to show how we go about supporting those jobs in Falkirk and in the local economy as well. Not just jobs, but also skills and opportunities for our young people as well. Okay.
Thank you for that. I do ask that when we get to the debate side that you listen. It's not a question for you just now, it's a statement I'll make later, and hopefully maybe take some of that on board.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Looking down the line here, I'm looking online. Any questions online? Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Convener. Excuse the voice again. A few questions, actually. First of all, they're in no particular order. The one thing I would state is that Taylor Wimpey, like many other national builders, of course, myself and I'm sure all my colleagues and officers would expect the quality of the building to be good. So I don't think you need to re-emphasise that. There are lots of other good builders out there. But my first question really is, you highlighted the fact that of people that responded to this application, that many of them lived out with the area. First of all, can I ask, is there any legal requirement or objection legally where people are not allowed to object to any development out with an area?
Hey, we'll bring in Mr. Henderson for that question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Thanks, Councillor Flynn. No, there's no area requirement in terms of representations being made on a planning application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson. And with that, going back to the applicants then, how many of these respondents have you validated that don't have relatives that live in the area or nearby this proposed estate? Have you done any of that validation?
Maybe come in on that. I mean, going back to the question, the reason we included that information was that there was quite a discussion on the location of some of the objections at the predetermination hearing. So I suppose from our point of view, it was more a case of reiterating. There was a lot of discussion about the fact that out of 113 objections, they weren't all from local area. We haven't undertaken any further analysis in terms of the actual location of every one of them, but it was more just the point that a lot of those comments came from out with the area, and then of course the case officer summarised the nature of those representations, and a lot of them are similar issues that have been raised that we feel have been addressed through the application process.
Yeah. So, but in theory, a lot of those people could have relatives that live in the area, so could take the local feeling, I guess. You know. You mentioned the rounding off the site and settlements. It's just my own observation, so pardon me. I just find it strange that it should be a reason to build somewhere where you're looking to round off, because if you look at the map, in actual fact, your proposed site actually encompasses 3 or 4 different areas: Dennismuir, Carnshaw, and part of Falkirk. So I don't see really the rounding off the site. You know, should that be a logical reason to build in anywhere? You know, if you're interested in the aesthetics of how a map looks, you know, it is on green belt as identified by our planning officer. Any comments on that, please? Thanks.
Thanks for the question. I'll maybe just share one of the plans we had earlier again, because it maybe helps explain. I think they take the comment on board. When you look at obviously the physical, a lot of those comments that have came historically from the Scottish Government over the last decade or so, as we've all discussed, is looking physically at the location of the site. And our point is that we're aware that local authorities are under a lot of pressure to look at sites which perhaps aren't physically located within existing residential areas, would act as an extension to it. And the point that's always been made is that with Webster Avenue to the east forming quite a strong boundary, and the pattern of urban development around the site, that if you look at the red line of the site as it sits there, we feel it does act as a useful infill. And in terms of it being a greenbelt site, you know, the greenbelt will probably be reviewed by the council as part of the forthcoming LDP process. But we've undertaken kind of landscape appraisals that I think was submitted with the application, which makes it clear that our landscape advisors do not agree that this site being developed would have any impact on the integrity of the greenbelt. You know, I think the opposite is the case, that actually they would perhaps challenge the value of this site as part of the greenbelt because of how it sits. But obviously we don't have a landscape person either within the council, I think, or here today. But that's really the explanation in terms of how the site sits physically. And you know, it's essentially got development on three sides, I suppose. Hope that helps to answer.
No, thanks for your answer. The only thing I would say is there is a tendency for settlements to lose their identity through infill, etc. My next point or question relates to, at the predetermination meeting, I raised the point about, it was raised that this isn't prime agricultural land, and I accepted the answer that was given at the time. But I wanted to ask is that one of the thoughts that came across, and I believe it might have been Councillor Bowes that mentioned at the time, but I'm not 100% certain, was the fact that because of the proximity to Carron Works going back, you know, quite a long time ago, this could well have been a location for, and there was a lot of mining in the area, and that would actually explain the low-grade quality of the, you know, the field or agriculture or whatever you want to call it there. So with that in mind, would you accept the fact that there is, as I mentioned in 4.17 in the report, a high risk of mines or mines that are not documented that may well be on this site?
Yes, thanks for the question. Absolutely. I think there's most of the sites we look at across Scotland have some history of mining on the site, and it's something we come against quite often. So we do expect to have to do intrusive groundworks on the site and potentially remediation as well for any mines that are encountered as we go through that engineering exercise. But yes, you're absolutely right. There is a risk of mining, as with, I think, probably any site within Falkirk that is going through LDP at the moment or applications otherwise.
Just a comment on that. If you look at the estate to the north of this proposed site, there is quite a large proportion of land that is not built on, and the reason for that is quite simple, because of the potential of mines in that area. So yeah, I take that. Just finally, my final point is, which I'm quite interested in. You mentioned, I don't know what the terminology was, but on the southern part of your site, you've got a red line showing a possible footway. Now, I visited that area. In fact, I know that area extremely well. Are you planning, how wide is this strip of land? Because it seems to me dangerously close to the New Carron Road. So is it going to be immediately adjacent to that road? Because otherwise you're going to be going through people's back gardens.
Yeah, I can pick up that question again. I'll probably look to share one of the plans a bit earlier. In fact, yeah, this is a drawing that we showed at the predetermination hearing as well. And as a bit of background, it is detailed in the report, but quite early on, a number of months ago, we had discussions with your internal roads colleagues, because the requirement for a footpath link to the core path to the south was raised as a key requirement within the council. So we've spent a lot of time, invested a lot of efforts working with Catherine and your other officers to look at a solution to providing that footpath link. You mentioned the width of the strip. The original suggestion was that we actually take a footpath link from Rufflands Drive down the kind of eastern side of some of the housing that's to the south of our site, but because of the existing kind of rural nature of that road and the widths and the potential need for third-party land, that was deemed probably not to be deliverable. So we then focused on the two options that are in front of you, and option 2, the one on the right, is the one that would look at the verge going down New Carron Road, I think it is, and would terminate at the would link to the core path on the eastern side of the road. Because we did get a topographic survey done, we have looked at this, although it's a planning in principle application, because we appreciate how important it was to the council and to officers. We looked into this in a probably a very much more detailed level than we normally would. So we've had a topographic survey and we've looked at a alignment, and our view is that we can provide that path down there. There is a couple of technical challenges in terms of levels and retention, but these are things that could be resolved through engineering, like any detailed design. The option that crosses the road was an alternative that we were asked to look at by your colleagues because of, at the start, some debate about whether we had enough space on an option 2, and that's where we proposed to put a kind of pedestrian crossing. There's also a lot more land and space to play with, so to speak, on the other side, which would then give you much more land in which to form a suitable access. So from our point of view as applicants, you know, we've had detailed discussions, we've tabled these options, and I think, you know, certainly our understanding is that, having spoke to your planning case officer, that they're satisfied that this matter could be conditioned. So we've shown a commitment and a willingness to deliver in this link, and we've shown that technically either of these two options could be delivered, but that would, if the application is approved, that would be for further information to be provided before we start construction effectively.
I think it is important to know as well, because this is a PPP application, there will be a further application process, and we will be back in front of you again with details if this was to be approved today, with those further details for you to review and examine at that point in time.
Okay, just to clarify then, thank you for that. So essentially you're talking about putting a footpath on the grass verge, and does that grass verge currently belong to you? Because you did mention that you own some land.
So that grass verge would be adopted. It's got street lighting in at the moment, so it'd be adopted verge.
But it would be immediately adjacent to the New Carron Road.
To the road, yes, that's right.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thank you for the answers, and thank you, Convener.
Thank you for your input, Councillor Flynn. I'm looking down the line here. Any other questions directly to the agents? Councillor Murtagh.
Yeah, it's just to pick up on partly on that last point, and I think as you put up on that map, and Councillor Flynn mentioned that where you see a rounding off, and you've cited a kind of rounding off development in terms of the communities that it's kind of connected to. When I, as a local member, when I see Rufflands, I see Carron Shore, you know, and coming up from that side, but it's kind of almost the way that you're suggesting with that footpath is connecting into what I would see as Carron, and these are different communities, and it is important in terms of you're making an argument for from the 20-minute neighbourhood, that we're not just saying that, you know, the distribution of that 20-minute neighbourhood is there are some bits up here towards Kinnaird or in Antons Hill, some bits that are in Stennismuir, some bits in Carron, some bits in Carron Shore. So have you done an assessment when you're thinking about different ways that the footpath element might connect in? You know, thinking about that sort of 20-minute neighbourhood connection, have you done an assessment in kind of both options about how that impacts your kind of community viability arguments?
Thanks. I've already picked up. So just to check, do you mean specifically to do with the two options we just discussed that go to the south?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, as part of the master planning process, albeit this is a planning in principle application, we right at the start, going back a number of years, we've obviously had our design colleagues and landscape advisors and roads advisors look at the wider area and look at how we can connect this site to the wider area. The key point being that, you know, using the term infill, I appreciate can be quite crude in planning terms, but the point being that if we were to build housing on this site, we want to integrate it. The whole point of, you know, good planning and placemaking these days is to have a site which integrates with all the areas around it. So, for instance, there has been during discussions on the application, we included a further foot and cycle path along the top of the site up towards the roundabout, because that was identified as a key link, and obviously the link to the south has been identified as being a key point as well. So yeah, the answer is we have assessed it, and actually the internal design of the site, although it's indicative, you know, the whole point of having there's almost like a kind of central access is to give connectivity, through the site, so that if people do use the path at the top, that they can walk through the site, they can use the recreational areas, the open space, they can walk their dogs, they can push prams and buggies, they can ride a bike, and they've got the opportunity to do that through our site. So the idea is that we do provide connectivity, because the point about 20-minute neighbourhoods and local living, we appreciate there's some facilities to the south, there's facilities to the north. We want to give people, if they were to live in that development, the opportunity to use whatever facilities they see fit. But obviously we've got an obligation to make sure that when people arrive at the edge of our site, that they've got a safe route to travel within the local area.
I think just to add to that as well, if you wouldn't mind, when we sell to customers, one of the first things customers think about is how do they walk, how do they cycle, how do they push a buggy to different places. We don't necessarily look at one development as being part of Carnshaw, part of Karen, part of Larbert, part of Stennismuir. We look at it as a whole, and we look at them to try and connect them as well as we possibly can. And that really is quite important to us for active travel, as well as just general travel within our own development and the wider area.
Absolutely, and I appreciate those answers. Sorry, getting an echo. But the point I'm making is that in order to make sure that the equality of access, that the safe access for, as you say, you want to have in every direction, and how you connect into those communities, that if there are potential options which are not maybe as viable or as safe as others, that that then if that is then limiting, and it might not do, you might be able to resolve that. But although it's plan permission in principle, it's important from the point of view, this isn't an allocated site, so we do have to look at material considerations which would override something. There has to be positive things in favour of the site that will allow us to consider things, and its connectivity, as you say, into all the communities, rather than just saying, well, we can make access through a particular route to this community, but if it's not, because it's at the heart of many different communities, and I want to know that there's been an assessment of how all of those will be connected into the site, so that all sorts of facilities can be accessed. And that's important from the point of view, if you're going to go in and access a shop and go to dentist and go to wherever at the same time, or a school, you don't want to have to, you're not going to walk in 5 different directions to get 5 different forms of facility. It's also important that you're able to access these things together as well, from a livability point of view too.
Okay, is that you summed up there? Thank you. Okay then, I'm conscious that once again I've used my discretion. I was highlighted to me about the 10-minute period. We're now into 25 minutes questioning. Is there any other questions then? No. Okay then. Thank you very much then for your time, and if you just would like to retake your seats, thank you.
I think it was.
Catherine at the moment. Catherine, you've heard the questions put, and you've heard the submission for the applicants and the agents. Have you anything further to add to your submission?
There's a couple of points I'd quite like to cover, convener. Thank you. There was mention of the national housing emergency. I think it would be worth having Alistair come in and make comment on that. My understanding that this document is really about acute housing need, those in the most serious situations, people who are homeless, people who are transient, and I think it's worth considering that, and perhaps Alistair can come in on that point.
So what you're saying then, that interpretation for the emergency housing need is specific to those areas that you were saying?
There's a general housing need, but the housing emergency is specifically in relation to acute need. So people in very difficult situations.
Okay, thank you. Alistair?
Yes, convener. I mean, I think a national housing emergency has been declared, and housing emergency has been declared in some local authorities as well. I think Catherine's right that the principal issue around housing in Scotland is homelessness and affordability issues. Planning clearly has a role to play in addressing the housing emergency, and that's been set out by Scottish Government, and it is about getting the system fit for purpose in terms of delivering housing, which is the government's intention is that should be done through the development plan system and faster decision making. It's not, I think, as we've said, the way the system has changed that I described in my piece, it's not about just releasing sites willy-nilly out with the development plan system.
I just say, Alistair, on that point, because obviously everybody knows, professional as your good selves, that the interpretation of a housing emergency to most people is that everybody realises there's so many people, so many thousands in Falkirk that's on the housing waiting list as well. And the fact is that they're not interested in green belts and so forth. They're just interested in getting a house. So the fact of the matter is that there not going to be changes? I know that down south there are going to be major changes in planning, and if you're going to tackle any problem, then you've got to tackle the root. You know, the route that we're looking at in this situation is the fact is that Falkirk, like every other area, although if you go into Stirling, you go to Glasgow, these areas just now, there's thousands of houses getting built, and I'm talking about thousands of houses. Are we looking at the policy issue and identifying the policy issue itself, or are we going to change our attitude towards this emergency crisis? I know it's a difficult one to say, but what I'm saying is that local development plans, everything takes time. 5 years, and by the time 5 years comes up, how many more people is going to be on there? And this is what people are asking us. So you got 5 year house, they're no interest in that. They just want to know when. I mean, how many council houses have been built by Falkirk Council over the past few years? No, there's no that many. No to the needs. The needs are getting greater all the time. And what we're saying is we're looking at the government to say, well, okay, the focus is you've got local development plans and so forth, but they need to, as far as I'm concerned, they need to adapt these local plans to what's on the ground just now. That's all I'm saying. And thank you very much for your professionalism. Anybody else like to come in? Billy Kerr and then Councillor Bowes.
No. Thank you very much, Convener. 2 or 3 questions for Alistair and Catherine, if I may. So, same question asked Brent time before. Greenbelt, agricultural land. When you pass that place, I pass it quite often going to the foundry. There's horses, sheep, cows in that area. So what designates it a green belt to agricultural?
You can have land which is in use for agricultural purposes, and that's really a sort of planning assessment that you make. The green belt is defined by the local plan, so it goes through a local plan process. It's determined based on whether it protects and enhances the character and landscape setting of an area, and how it defends the identity of a village or town and prevents suburbanisation of the countryside. So it's a policy assessment that is done at the local plan stage.
So everything outside the village that's got grass is designated as greenbelt to protect? No, to protect. Doesn't he come? Doesn't matter what one is, doesn't he come?
I'm happy to come in on that one if you want. I think there is an element of confusion around definitions. In terms of the local plan, the countryside is all the land out with the urban village and urban limits as defined in the on the proposals map. So that's all countryside. It's a division between the rural area and the urban area. Greenbelt is a more specific designation that pertains to certain areas that fulfill certain functions, such as protecting landscape landscape quality and character, and also the separation of communities where communities are close together. Yeah. There's a particular need for a stronger and longer term protection, and that's really where Greenbelt, the relationship of Greenbelt to countryside. Yeah, we protect our countryside from development, from, as Catherine said, suburbanisation, but Greenbelt is a stronger and longer term designation.
Yeah. Thanks, Alistair. Probably leading on for the convener. 10,500 people in Falkirk on the waiting list for a house. 1,200 of them are homeless. Like what the convener says, these people can't wait 5-10 years for a house. My son's one of them, and it's at the desperate stage now. So, for regards, I know the HC01 has been superseded by Policy 16, which Catherine's already mentioned. But how many houses are we in keeping with what we've said for the last local development plan, or are we behind in the housing land audit?
Sorry.
It was just to preface Alistair's comment. I'm sitting with the Miller Homes case at the moment, and I think there is a clear understanding that the new policy is taking quite a different approach to the previous policy. I think it's referred to as almost the antithesis of the previous approach to things. But there's an interesting quote in the submissions by the Scottish ministers in the case, and they do say the clear intent of the new approach to exceptional land release is to encourage and prioritise the delivery of allocated housing. The new policy rewards success for beating targets rather than rewarding failure to meet them. So it's an interesting switch, but the way the pipeline would work is that if an authority was exceeding its housing targets under its delivery pipeline quite substantially, as demonstrated by the housing land audit, then that's a justification for unallocated sites to be granted permission if they meet the spatial strategy and so on. But what the policy is not saying is just because you're failing to provide housing in the area and get these allocated sites through the system, that doesn't mean that you should be giving unallocated sites permission. So it's a real shift in emphasis. So I thought it was maybe just important to sort of set that context from what the court was analysing. And I think Councillor Murtagh made an interesting point when she was saying that you would be looking at, if this was to be granted, not complying with the development plan, but you'd need to find probably some pretty good material considerations to outweigh the development plan. And that's also something that's noted in the decision of Lord Boyd, I think it was, in the Miller Homes case, where he says it's important to keep in mind the difference between development planning and development control. An application for development, or an application for planning permission is to be determined in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise, Section 25 of the 1997 Act. So sorry for interceding there. I just thought it was maybe important to set a bit of context there, and thanks convener, thanks Bailey Kerr.
If you can get Lord Boyd's number, I'll send the 10,500 folk to us to get in contact with him. When you look at page 116 or 116 in the papers, and I know the delegation for the applicants didn't mention it. Either Catherine or Alistair. Would you not describe that as an infill site? 116. Drawn. And I know they didn't, I think it was the gentleman in the middle says a bit harsh word, but it could be construed as being an infill site, as there is houses 3 sides of it. But we're not describing it as that.
Yep, what's your view in that one?
I'm not bothered who answers.
You don't want an answer?
I don't want an answer, I'm not bothered who answers it.
I was trying to, think about what the context of the question was.
Context of the question is, why did we not think it was an infill site when we've got houses 3 sides of it?
I'm not sure that it matters whether it's an infill site or not when it's greenbelt and countryside. It's not within the urban limits.
So the next 2 applications we'll forget an empty then, because they're according to the local development plan, greenfield sites. So you've got to, as a few people have already mentioned, you've got to take each one individually. And as Councillor Murtagh already mentioned, if there is if there is a consideration to go out with the local development plan, is that a policy that could be one that you could come outside what the policy says?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I quite understand the question. I don't know whether someone else wants to step in.
Are you coming in, Ian? Mr. Henderson's going to come in on this one.
Oh, thanks, convener. I was getting a green light for a moment there rather than red. Material considerations can take a number of forms. They don't necessarily require compliance with the specific provisions of the development plan, and consideration of material considerations is essentially for the planning judgment of the decision makers, and in this case that is the committee. I don't know if my planning colleagues would have anything to add to that.
I think that simplifies it. Back to you,
I think you answered the question, Ian.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I think
Anything
I've
else?
got one more question, convener. When it states in the papers, the school would be Carnshore. Why Carnshore? Cairns is close.
Catherine?
Unfortunately, I can't answer that.
All
That's
right.
a matter for
Probably
children's
Cairn is
services.
closer than Carnshore. All right, I'll just have a question. That's fine.
Okay, is that you finished?
Yep, thank you, convener.
Have we any other questions? Has Councillor Murtagh wanted back in? Councillor Murtagh?
I was asked a question of officers.
Yep.
It's on the Greenbelt issue. Sorry, there's a bit of an echo. I don't know if it's that there's too many microphones on in the room. I don't know. Effectively, because it's been said about how the Greenbelt, the recommendations that perhaps it could be considered in future or changes. But from my understanding, from a policy perspective, the Greenbelt was decided in the local development plan. And at that time, it would have been considered whether we should change that out of Greenbelt. And we decided within the development plan that is still valid and is valid for some time. I know there's the kind of figures that when we adopted it, but it's it sounds like a five-year plan, but with that sort of running time into the next plan, there's that, it's almost like a 10-year period as I kind of understood it with different things. So we decided that it was Greenbelt, and there was examination at that time whether to remove it. So is that the policy which stands? Can you explain about some of the statements that are being made as to, will it be considered to come out of Greenbelt, but it is still, we've given full consideration that it should stay the Greenbelt. Is that correct?
The simple answer to that, convener, is yes. It went through the local development plan process. It went through an examination. A reporter reviewed it. It went to full council, and that was the decision that was taken. This should be in the Greenbelt and shouldn't be taken out. And
I think what's important to me, sorry, I'm getting the echo again. What's important to me from that point of view is when you're saying as well that this went through the process, not only of us deciding it, it went to Scottish Government who reviewed it, there's then that process of reviewing some of the representations and objections from, for example, landowners, etc., or interested parties. But despite that, it still came back to us and we approved that and we decided that. So that has already been looked at, and we've taken cognizance of that. And I think when we come to the main part, I think what is different for me, and I'm looking at a 3D view, which doesn't seem to have been shown, that if we look at that site going down towards the Ochils, going down towards where you would look towards Carnshore, that's where the vista of the Ochils, the vista all the way around, the change from one particular Stenhouse Muir line to another comes in, and it is not, in my mind, the same as a kind of infill development coming on, and that to me seems why perhaps we've looked at that as Greenbelt, and continue to think that it is Greenbelt. So I'm pleased to have those answers from Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you for your input again there. Have we any other questions then at this stage? Councillor Flynn.
Yep, keep me right. Sorry, excuse me. Keep me right, convener. I'm not sure if this question should be asked at this stage or a future stage. I'd like to know, this proposed site is in the location of the New Carn Road and obviously Webster Avenue, incredibly busy roads. I lived for 12 years in the estate to the north of that, and the traffic's probably trebled since then. I wonder who could answer the question, what is the volume of traffic that goes down the New Carn Road, and what impact would that have on the safety of any people walking on a proposed footpath down the edge of it? That's my first question. But if it's at the appropriate time to ask that question.
No, we can ask just now. We can ask Craig Russell to come in on that issue.
Yeah, thanks for bringing me in, convener. Unfortunately, it's probably not one for me to answer. The question of road capacity, vehicle numbers, direction of travel, that sort of thing, that's typically handled by a transport planning unit. They would review a traffic assessment as part of the development appraisal. I don't think anyone from transport planning is on the meeting today, convener.
Okay. Then, thanks.
But I think generally, if I may, Craig, just say through yourself, convener, is that it's one of the key primary routes into Falkirk, you know, from out with Falkirk, the Belsight Road and that. So I know it's a generalisation, but it is incredibly busy. You know, that doesn't give me numbers, but go down there any day between, I don't know, 7:30 and 9:30, and there'll be queues all the way back. I'm sure perhaps you'd be aware of that.
Yep.
Convener, did you want a comment on that?
Sorry.
Yes, Craig, give you a wee comment on that.
Yeah, yes, it's a busy road. I used to travel that way when we were based at Abbotsford House, morning and evening. So yes, it can be a busy road. I would concur with that.
Okay, thank you, convener. Just one other aspect, which if it belongs to the transport planning unit, then we'll default to them. But around this site, we haven't touched on it yet. Maybe that comes in the debate. You've got Roughlands Drive, which is coming off Webster Avenue, and it comes into the farm buildings, which is a blind corner. And I've travelled that hundreds of times, and it creates what I would call a pinch point, and is very, very bad and unsafe. It then goes down, obviously, towards Mill Road, and there's another pinch point there. And both Webster Avenue and Mill Road join onto extremely busy junctions, as you would guess. The Carnshore Road and the other side, the Kincardine Road. 150 houses, let's say an average of 1.5 to 2 cars per house, which is not unreasonable. that's going to create quite a significant traffic problem and risk for pedestrians, children, etc. I don't know who would answer that or what any viewpoints anyone has on that.
I'll come back to you, Craig. I know it might be your remit, but have you just give a generalisation on that question?
Yeah, again, unfortunately, it's sort of out with our remit. As I said before, the number of vehicles generated by development, the direction they travel, that's all contained in the transport assessment that's considered by our colleagues in the transport planning unit, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. But it is a major consideration. I'm not asking you, Craig, but it is a huge consideration because these roads are incredibly busy and dangerous. Thanks, convener.
Oh, thank you for your input, sir. Okay, then, any other direct questions? I think it's Councillor Bowes got his finger on the button. A debate. Okay. Any other questions? Then we can right into the debate now. Into the debate. Councillor Bowes, in you come.
Thank you, convener. First of all, can I thank Taylor Wimpey for the very professional presentation. I'm old enough to remember you when you were Taylor Woodrow and just Wimpey. That must be getting really old. It was a good presentation. I get you're going with it. The reason I asked that when you were having that presentation was, and this might be a wee bit of shock to you, it's too small. 150 is too small. If you're going to make a material change, if we're going to make a material change and go into this area, if we were talking about developing from Hillikinard right round and we were talking a major project with a lot of support structure coming into the area, that may be a different, for myself personally, that may be a different way I would have looked at this today. But as I think Councillor Murtagh had mentioned, and it's been talked about, a material change, there has to be something material in it. That would have been material, it would have been significant, because the investment in infrastructure would have been huge coming on the back of it. That's why I asked the question about, because I know there is a number of construction companies who have got reserves on land in the area. There is LDP3 coming up, so you can harass Alistair, because I'll be saying to Alistair, it's something we have to think about as a further development. It's a natural area to develop. It's quite flat area. It opens onto the road access and it gets us closer to Laura out north, which is even better. So that's my comment directly to yourselves, and you'll see. But I'll now go on why. In this case, I will be proposing the officer's recommendations. And one, I've seen a number of pictures. So that, as Jim had mentioned earlier, Cairn Ironworks used to own the area, and they have done a lot of mining in the area. There is some historic photographs. I know they were sent in by at least one person. I've got a copy of them. I would guess they would have done it as open cast, so they would have filled it in, and if you ended up having soil problems there, if you were doing it as a major project, much bigger project, it might become more affordable to do it. Under a smaller project, I think it would probably give you as a company more problems, because I think the money you would spend on rehabilitation of the land could end up being semi-significant. I know the area well, as also my ward, as it is Councillor Flynn's and Councillor Murtagh's. I know on the other side of the road, we quite often get flooding coming into the back of the council houses that are there. In fact, recently we've had to put in a French drain round to take actually the water away from there. So I know the problems that there is in that locality. The road, as was mentioned earlier on, if anybody doesn't know it, it's only got a path on one side. Webster Avenue at that point, it's got a path down one side, so it's quite, for what is a main artery, as Jim described, coming in from Stenhousemuir to come into Cairn Shore, it's quite a poor road, and you're talking about adding again volume to it. On schools, there's not actually so much a problem in Cairn Shore and Cairn. The occupancy rates for the primary schools are actually not too bad. But the sardine tin, which we call Larbert High, is still very high. And to keep adding to that, when we're actually getting to a point that hopefully it's going to start to come down a little bit, without building additional infrastructure, it's really difficult to build on the site elaborate high. Can't go up the way because the foundations, as you know, will have been set for the size of the structure. To put another level on top of that, and you've got a 3-storey, you end up with a 3-storey high school. And you're talking about getting over 2,000 pupils again, which I understand was the biggest in Scotland for a local authority school. So that's troublesome in itself. There is a couple of other things I'd like to see in there. As ever, we tend to get problems. We've got problems with health. The health side, getting monies from them or get them to ask for that. Sport and leisure, I think we should also be looking at. But if we did this as part of a bigger development, you'll get a bigger hit. You'll get something to be a lot more positive to the area. To be honest, I could keep going. I'm not one. It's not about entirely having. I'm not having a go at the developer in any way whatsoever. I just think it's too small a development for the area. I think we need in that area if we're going to do anything, because by doing it small, you're not really significantly adding to the infrastructure. If there was a bigger development, we would be adding significantly to the infrastructure, and that's my big worry on it. So for those reasons and the reasons as laid out by Catherine for refusal, I'm going to propose for refusal of the application.
Thank you for that. Councillor Murtagh.
Thanks, convener. I'm happy to second that, although I have different views from some of the things that Councillor Bowes said. I think the material point here is that ultimately we're proposing the officer's recommendations because there are no mitigating factors in my mind from a planning legal perspective which would override the considerations that we've got to take in terms of making this decision against local planning policy and local development plan. I can't see any. And I think that the policies and the reasons that they're, the inclusion of the site is unallocated and it's still classification of greenbelt have been well demonstrated. And that there is not a significant reason to re-examine them at this point or to think that they would be overridden even in the future development plan. But that remains to be seen, and there's that opportunity there. I do think there are some concerning things. As I say, I disagree with Councillor Bowes about the come back with a bigger. If it was bigger, then it would be different. Just from the point of view of some of the local infrastructure situations, and also because I do think that it is a really important area of greenbelt. And I referenced that the character of this particular part of the ward. It would change completely. It would change the countryside feel to that. If you put housing there and you rounded off that development, you would no longer have that rural aspect from Stenhousemuir out towards the Oakholes. And this, the word that the three of us share on this committee, being called Carse, Kinnaird and Tryst, that's kind of what connects it together. And that's an important consideration in terms of the settlements characters and how we look at these different what in some ways we still regard as village settings, even though they're more urban to people out with this ward, but they do still have that feel from that perspective for us. So for the reasons that it doesn't meet any reason to go contrary to development plan, I will be supporting refusal. But I do just want to make a quick comment about something that was said during the deputation, and that was about comments from outside this area. And we know that they could all be from out with this area, and we've seen in previous applications international comments, and that that's just part of the planning process. I generally take any excuse for making a spreadsheet. It doesn't matter what it is. On this occasion, I didn't, and sometimes I do go through and do some analysis about where they are. But when I looked at it and saw that there was less than about 20%, or it's there or thereabouts, 80% of the comments are from Falkirk Council area. And it's important not to mischaracterise that. I'm not saying that's what the applicants did, but I wanted to make sure that was clear. This is not a case of people from outside the area objecting to this application. There's around 80% that are within, so it's important that's stated and noted as part of the committee. Thank you, convener.
Okay, thank you for your input. Okay, just to clarify where we are, we've got a motion moved by Councillor Bowes, seconded by Councillor Murtagh, to go with the recommendations contained within the report, and that's to refuse. Is there anybody else like to come in at this stage? Councillor Flynn.
Yeah, thank you, convener. Yes, I do appreciate you letting me in. There's a few comments I'd like to make. First of all, I support the green belt because if it's green belt, it's green belt, you know, and we're gradually losing the, if you like, the proper settlements across the whole of Falkirk by integration of different sites. And call it what you like, call it housing creep. If you look at the map that was shown by the representatives from Taylor Wimpey, you'll notice there's another piece of green farmland just below that other side of the farmhouse. So if this was granted, is that going to be next? And it's just another infill. And then before you know, we're across the road to the other field. It's important that different settlements maintain their identity. They're typical of many, many settlements. People are proud in these settlements and want to maintain that. So that's my first comment. My second comment is if anybody's ever walked down the New Carn Road to the bottom end towards the roundabout and stood there for whatever reason where there was a little bit of pavement, you'd be horrified when it's busy. There's houses either side of that, certainly up in a periphery, where the houses shake when lorries go down. And I shudder at the fact that, and it may be for the best of reasons initially, that we're wanting to create a footpath on a grass verge to allow access mainly for children, parents and whatever to walk down New Carn Road. We're going to increase the hazard. This is nonsense. We should be trying to minimise the hazard, not increase it, you know, rather than, and children being children, and children can be up to the age of 18 and whatever, they won't go down to a crossing and wait to cross the road there. And even if you put a metal fence up, they'll leap over, run in front and head across the road and take a shortcut. My third, but possibly the main point is that we haven't really focused on it too much, and it's no criticism of anybody. The easy access to schools and to local places is or wouldn't be easy from this site. This site is effectively an island surrounded on three sides by extremely busy main arteries, or not main arteries, roads, one main artery and other busy roads. You've got Webster Avenue where no matter what the speed limit is, the cars hurtle down there. They then come to a congested area where there's parking either side. And it's already been mentioned by another councillor, there's a footpath on the other side of the road. You've got the Ferguson Drive Redpath area where you've got to cross a busy road to get there. And if you're going to say St Bernadette School, how are you going to get there? You're going to have to decide to cross this road, wend your way through the estate there, and then find your way. Larbert High School, there's no easy route to walk. Yeah, it'd be nice to walk, you know. Go down Mill Road, go down Rufflands Road and Mill Road. It's a dangerous, there are lots of pinch points, there's blind corners, and also when you get to the bottom end, a lot of traffic congestion currently, and with 300 plus cars, if you include delivery vehicles, etc., come to these junctions, the hazard and the road congestion is going to increase. We talk about climate change. Well, I mentioned it here, but adding to all that in increased congestion will not assist climate change in the least. So we should be cognizant of that and thinking about that. But my main concern is safe routes to school and other facilities that children might want to go to. And of course, Carn Shore might be the allocated school, but children can go to Carn. But either way, there's a risk for children, especially younger children, primary school at P1, 2, 3 and 4, going along that road. So it's not just a case of let's hit our housing target, let's have an infill site, which it isn't, because of the shape of it, it's not an infill site. It's a green belt site and that's the end of it. We should be taking that into consideration. And with that in mind, I strongly support the officer's recommendation to reject this. It's the wrong development in the wrong area at the wrong time. Thank you, convener.
No, thank you for explaining your local knowledge there, Councillor Flynn. OK, just to see where we are, we've got a motion moved and seconded to agree the recommendations contained within the report. Is there anybody otherwise minded? Have we agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. OK, thank you very much. We'll have a 5-minute comfort break. That will be this. That was 1:30. That's an hour and a half. So a wee comfort break. Thank you. 5 minutes. Well, I'm the same.
That is not cheap.
Okay, all right, General.
That big fella from Taylor Gunson, he was one of my scouts.
Was he?
Lovely to spotted it.
Item 8. Okay then, everybody, thank you very much. We'll reconvene the meeting. That takes us directly to item 8 on your agenda this afternoon, which is development of land for residential use at land to the east of 20 Bankview Terrace, Denny Road, Denelin Head, for Barleyfield Developments Limited. It's pages 117 to 138 on your agenda papers. Now, we'll start off right away by saying that there's a deputation request being asked for by Mr. David Jones, the agent. I'm happy to move that we grant the deputation request. Everybody agreed?
Agreed.
That's fine. And once again, we go to Catherine Chorley for the report. Thank you, Catherine.
Thanks, Kavina. Again, it will be myself and Alistair. Many of the issues will be repeated, so please bear with us. I'm aware again that you will have read the report, and I just want to make clear from the beginning to ensure there's sort of no confusion or anything unclear in the report. This is a residential development. There's no restrictions on that type of residential development. It's not a retirement village. It's not for people over a certain age or with certain needs. There's no controls on the end user, and no detailed justification has been provided for any other kind of housing type. So we're assessing it as mainstream housing, accessible and available to anyone. So bearing all of this in mind, again, I'm just going to pick out some key facts. This site is located in the Greenbelt. It's in the countryside. These are two designations set out in the local development plan. In this location, the Greenbelt serves an important function. It protects the landscape setting of the wider area and reinforces the settlement boundaries. Development in this location would, without a doubt, equate to sporadic and piecemeal development in the open countryside, which is not supported by policy. The site is not allocated in the development plan. It has not been put forward for consideration through previous development plans. We have, however, had a number of applications over the years that have been submitted for this site, and these are all detailed in the report. They go back to the 1990s, 2000, 2003, 4, 7, 8 and onwards. These applications have all been withdrawn or refused. I would say that policy HC01 is accepted as being incompatible with MPF4, and that Scottish planning policy has been superseded. There's a really strong and clear move away from allowing unallocated sites to be approved. And this was really made clear in the Moss End Farm appeal, which I'll ask Alistair to give you a brief overview of just now.
Okay, thanks. Through you, convener. Just a brief further explanation on the changes that in planning policy with regard to housing that is referred to in the report. So, previous dispensation was that under previous Scottish Government policy, as reflected in LDP policy HC01, there was a requirement to maintain a 5-year supply of effective housing land, and in the event of a shortfall in that 5-year supply, the so-called exceptions provision within policy HC01 would allow sites not allocated in the LDP to be supported where they were considered to constitute sustainable development. The concept of the 5-year effective land supply and the requirement to maintain such a supply has been removed under NPF4, in particular through policy 16, which is the housing policy. And there is a stronger emphasis through that policy on allocated plan-led sites with land not allocated for housing only allowed in very limited circumstances. And those circumstances are set out in section F of policy 16. And that section F also introduces the concept of a deliverable housing land pipeline, which is to be established in LDP delivery programmes and provides a view on the phasing of housing allocations. This part of the policy is designed to facilitate bringing forward of additional sites only where the speed of delivery of existing sites is substantially faster than anticipated in the housing land pipeline, with reference to the housing land audit. and evidence from current and recent housing land audits indicates that this is not a situation that prevails currently in the Falkirk Council area. In the Moss End Judicial Review, Miller Homes advanced the view that Policy 16 was inoperable, pending the preparation of new style local development plans, and that in the meantime, LDP exceptions policies should continue to be used. And the essence of the Court of Session ruling was that this interpretation wasn't accepted, and the court confirmed that old exceptions policies were no longer applicable. So in summary, MPF4 Policy 16 is the relevant policy to apply, and Section F of that policy is the section relevant to non-allocated sites. HCO1 is not considered compatible with it and should be treated as superseded. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thanks, Alistair. And to follow up from that, again, we're looking at housing policy in MPF4, and it's clear that this proposal does not meet the requirements in relation to housing, greenbelt, countryside and rural development. It fails to comply with policies on climate change and the nature crisis. Essentially, this development does not comply with policies in the development plan. Our local development plan is up to date. We have a suitable housing land supply, and we have allocated sites in the wider area that are available for development. The LDP, as I've said previously, is delivering on allocated sites, and there's no policy justification to approve the development. In which case, we'll be looking at material considerations, which are set out in the report. And our view is that these do not outweigh non-compliance with the development plan in this case. We have therefore got 6 reasons for refusal that we are recommending on this application. We would ask again that Policy 16 should be added to reason 1 on the list of refusal reasons. As with the previous application, we've got education comments to bring forward for Councillor Flynn that were dealt with on the PDH request. So if you're happy, I'll just give an update on that.
Yeah, carry on.
So Children's Services have advised that the calculation would be for units of 2 or more bedrooms each at a rate of £2,994, giving a total of £62,894 for a contribution. I think in the report it breaks it down in a bit more detail because the original scheme suggested it would be 11 2-bed and the rest would be 1 bedroom, but that's indicative, so it's not confirmed at this point. So Councillor Flynn, you also requested more information on educational contributions. The current capacity at Denny High School is 1,634, which puts current occupancy levels at 85%. There are other large-scale developments planned within the catchment area for Denny High School, including 18 new housing sites in the housing land audit with a community growth of around 2,469 houses in the area. As a result, Children's Services expect the school roll to reach and exceed available capacity in the medium to long term, depending on market delivery rates. Substantial investment will be required to accommodate pupil growth in the school to meet demand from this level of housing growth in the catchment area. Additional PE changing room capacity was added to the school due to there being insufficient capacity to meet recent pupil growth. Planning obligation money was used to achieve this. Further analysis has also been undertaken to identify areas of the school that will come under pressure as occupancy levels rise, and planning obligations for all new housing developments will ensure that the council can fund the necessary investment in Denny High School. And that's it from me, convener. Thank you.
Okay. Can you just answer one question before we go on in terms of your submission? Is this bungalow type housing?
They have indicated that it would be bungalow housing, but there's no restriction on that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, then it's an opportunity to maybe hear more for Mr. David Jones, the agent, to step forward. You've been here before, Mr. Jones. It's 10 minutes as soon as you're set up. And then there'll be an opportunity for members to ask you questions.
Good afternoon, convener and members of the committee. If I can start by just
You
giving
want to put it closer to you, so because we're online, remember, so everybody can hear what you're saying.
Sorry, Convener. Is that any better? Yeah. Convener, this application in principle proposes a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom bungalows on a vacant, non-productive site in Denny Road. The site is close to existing amenities and public transport links. The development is targeted at a maturing older market, but not exclusively. There's no age restriction proposed. This concise presentation highlights the key planning benefits we believe justify approval of the application, which can be categorised under the following headings. Firstly, housing emergency. The Scottish Government, with cross-party support, has declared a national housing emergency, recognising the acute shortage of housing. A broad range of organisations, including local authorities, Homes for Scotland and Shelter, have all echoed the Scottish Government's concerns. This is driven by a combination of factors, including lack of supply, rising demand for affordable housing, escalating construction costs, restrictions on funding, and relatively high interest rates. These factors, combined with the COVID-19 pandemic and the current cost of living crisis, have created a perfect storm to generate a housing emergency. In response, Scotland's Chief Planner issued a letter on the 26th of June stressing the necessity for immediate and coordinated action to meet current and future housing demands across Scotland. Focus is on delivery and accelerating the construction of new homes across all tenures to alleviate shortages and reduce homelessness. Falkirk Council's Local Development Plan 3 housing topic paper dated April of 24 acknowledges the need for additional housing to meet existing and future demand. Recently approved by Council, this paper estimates an additional 6,100 homes will be required over a 10-year period of the Local Development Plan 3. Michael McGuinness, Falkirk Council's Head of Growth, Planning and Climate Change, at a recent Council meeting recognised the housing crisis affecting Scotland, stated to members it was right to look at how the Council can encourage more homes being built for people in the area. Within this context, we agree with Mr McGuinness and Council members for the need for additional homes and believe our proposals will help Falkirk Council deliver this much needed new housing in a timely fashion. Section 2, Sustainable Location. The site is easily accessible by public transport and within walking distance of several existing local amenities, including convenience stores, pharmacy and post office. The proposals will bring back into use an otherwise disused land incapable of economic agricultural use. Thirdly, demand for bungalows. Our market research highlights an urgent and growing need for smaller, adaptable properties for an increasing ageing population. My client has already received 22 inquiries to date, clear evidence of a strong demand for this type of housing in this location. The bungalows will meet all current design requirements of Scottish Government's housing for varying needs, for example, wider doors, ramps where required, and will also meet the latest energy efficiency requirements. A 6% population increase, which equates to 10,000 people, over the next 20 years, with a projected 13% increase in household formation rates, is forecast in the Council's own housing needs and demand assessment. There will be a stronger representation of people in their late 40s, 50s and 60s, and it is from this group that will mostly require smaller, adaptable dwellings as they look to downsize or seek a more appropriate type of property, importantly, freeing up housing for families. Demand for smaller dwellings will increase as independent living into older age continues to grow. My client's proposal can help fill this gap. NPF 4 sets out the Scottish Government's policies and proposals for use of land. Policy 16 states that development proposals for new homes that improve affordability and choice by being adaptable to changing diverse needs and which address identified gaps in provisions will be supported. It further notes that the majority of the population want to remain in their home as they age, preferring mainstream housing, and so accessible and adaptable homes can allow people to continue to live independently. These proposals will provide much needed smaller homes and help reduce the shortfall of this type of housing across the area. Fourthly, poor condition of site. An independent agricultural assessment report prepared by Scottish Agricultural College states any attempt to bring the site into agricultural production due to its size and isolated location would be extremely difficult, very costly and not economically justified. The report concludes that the site is non-agricultural and incapable of being brought into any form of agricultural use. The report states, and I quote, "Realistically, any potential agricultural use would be out of the question for the above reasons." Fifthly, minimal impact of proposed development. The site is self-contained and clearly defined. The actual built development will take up only around a third of the site capacity. The remaining land will be landscaped with a particular emphasis on boundary treatment. We have carefully considered the draft layout, design and height of any proposed buildings to minimise any visual impact the development may have. This development proposes no threat to the surrounding productive farmland, which is in different ownership and separated from the subject site by watercourses. Sixthly, developability and developer contributions. The proposed development can be delivered and there are no constraints that would either impact on or delay construction. We will continue to work with the Council and its partners to bring forward detailed proposals at the earliest opportunity, subject to approval. This would include a construction and environmental management plan that will control all construction operations and associated traffic movements. Site investigations, including test borehole drilling, confirms it to be undisturbed ground, free from contamination, and is minerally stable. The Council's transportation officers agree that the site can be accessed safely. Council officers also accept the development will have no noticeable impact on the nearby road network. We have agreed to meet all play space, woodland improvement requested contributions, including the wider road network, school and additional school infrastructure through a secure binding legal agreement. With a fair wind, construction could start during the latter part of this year or early next. 7. Benefits to existing local facilities. In recognition of the good work carried out by the community, we have agreed to make a voluntary financial contribution to the nearby Denny Road Community Hall Management Committee, again subject to this approval. The financial contribution will be based on £600 per unit. In considering wider economic benefits, the development will take around 2 years to complete, and it is anticipated approximately 20 full-time jobs will be created, including site managers, ground workers, bricklayers, joiners, plumbers and labourers, who will make full use of existing shops and food outlets, giving a boost to the local authority. And in conclusion, Convener, the proposals will provide much needed additional housing in a sustainable location and make best use of this edge of urban, vacant, neglected site which currently suffers from fly tipping. There are no physical or technical constraints preventing development. We believe there will be no significant adverse impact on the amenity currently enjoyed by near neighbours, whilst meeting an identified need for additional housing. The proposals will help support local shops, bus services and community facilities, and will create jobs. The site is well placed in relation to the Council's 20-minute neighbourhood policy initiative. Given the above, it is safe to conclude the proposals, whilst modest in scale and impact, will make a positive contribution to the overall environment and help meet the demand for new housing. We therefore respectfully request that this application be approved. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, sir. Speak just now, and then we'll go to members of the committee. Any questions at this stage? Councillor Forrest.
Just the one for you. You'll be pleased to hear that. The first statement that you made was it's a non-productive area. Does it have to be productive?
There's broader sense.
Yeah.
There's broader sense. But we have, in this particular instance, it's a juxtaposition adjacent to productive farmland. When I visited the site on 2 or 3 different occasions, it was subject to neglect in parts. Perhaps the fencing wasn't as secure or the boundary wall as it should be. And there was clearly evidence of some fly tipping. So perhaps in that context, I would view that to be non-productive.
Okay, thank you. It's because it is designated green belt, and as such, it does have a use. It does have a use, although it doesn't produce anything. It protects the communities from development. Fly tipping, you said there, perhaps the fences weren't as good as they should be. It is the responsibility of the landowner, although the council helps out as and when it can. That was all it was. Thank you for that.
Hey, thank you. Who wants to come in next? Councillor Redmond.
Thanks. I was just wondering if you could maybe, I think one of the officers' statements, they were saying that the site doesn't meet the demands of the climate change and nature crisis. Could you maybe, I know you said that only a third of the site's going to be developed and there's quite a lot of green space, but could you maybe expand a bit on how you could maybe still encourage a friendly environment for nature and different species to kind of inhabit the site? And then also climate change, you sort of said that houses would meet all the kind of latest sustainability targets, but what would that mean? Would that mean solar panels? Would they use gas or would they use air source heat pumps? Thanks.
2 parts to that particular question, convener. The site itself does have, if you like, capacity to accommodate this relatively small built area across the site in total. 2/3 of the site will be given over to landscape, and beyond that, biodiversity, if you like, future planning arrangements to accommodate wildlife into and across that area would be built into any detailed planning scheme. So that would be for the next submission to look at in how that could be progressed. In relation to, well, in recognition in terms of climate change, adherence to current and future building standards, this development would be brought on the basis that it would meet those highest building standards possible, including the use of modern techniques, perhaps involving heat pump, air source, energy saving arrangements. We haven't looked at in any specific detail, but the size and style of the properties themselves would allow that to happen.
Thanks.
Okay. Bailey Kerr.
Thanks, convener. There's not been an amount because it's an indicative amount. How many units do we anticipate?
Well, at the moment, the indicative plan that we've lodged shows 21 units. This is a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom properties. Our detailed scheme will focus primarily on that arrangement. We have no plans to increase or we might fluctuate. That would be, if I was to say to you, convener, that this would be our upper limit. We see no case for increasing it. The site works productively around those numbers, but we may alter the mix of 1 and 2 bedroom properties depending on market demand.
Okay, so you also mentioned that you are doing a voluntary contribution to the local community hall, £600, so £12,600. It's not to be laughed at. It's every hall could be doing that, and I'm sure each and every one of us in this room, their halls could be doing that. So, thanks very much.
Councillor Kelly.
Hi, David. You mentioned the shops and you're nearby, but the shops are across a busy road, and especially if it's older people, that's going to be a hell of a road to cross. The path, the pavement is too narrow. You'd have to take out the hedgerows to widen the pavement. So what were your plans for that?
Well, at the moment, we've looked at what footpaths are currently available adjacent to the site. And the question that was posed to us originally when we looked at our transportation statement, the footpath is extremely narrow at the moment because it's covered with debris. And when we've looked at how much that debris covers the existing footway, it measures 1.8 meters in width, which is, if you like, the old standard that was available. Current requirements for new developments are suggesting 2 meters in width. So we've got a like 200 millimeter gap or distance or shortage in between the old standard and the new. I have some concerns if we're forced to increase that footpath width from 1.8 to 2 meters, we're losing a significant amount of the stone walling and in particular the hedging which adjoins it. So my suggestion would be that we do all the maintenance necessary to increase the maximum width of the existing footpath, and we pursue that. Access arrangements and crossing points have been lodged with your transportation officers, and the feedback that we're getting from that is that officers are quite happy with those latest arrangements. So we can make it work. Your officers have looked at it in some detail. And you'll see in terms of the report itself, and this goes on to page 21. Page 21. There, the officers themselves confirm that is the case.
They further say, but the site access still requires a portion of the opposite side of the carriageway to enable the manoeuvre as tracked. And this manoeuvre should be retracked with the refuse vehicles using a portion of the hatched area on the Denny Road. And this would reduce excessive encroachment onto the exit lane of the development.
We've taken the 7A, paragraph 56. Junction has been redesigned to take account of concerns raised in relation to safety and accessibility.
Can somebody turn that thing off?
The amended design indicates that an acceptable access to the site could be achieved. The detail would need to be secured by condition.
Regarding the crossing of the road and that, what sort of would you be putting in there to alleviate danger to people?
We're happy to look at with your own officers, convener, how best to cross that road. It might be a position of a central island that would facilitate a crossing point. I would point out also that the existing bus stop is directly outside the site, so people have to cross the road in any event to access that. So in combination with any resiting of the bus shelter, for example, we could certainly consider that, but we would do that in conjunction at detailed stage with your own transportation officers.
Got a few questions for you at the moment. Obviously, in your submission there was quite a bit of information that you gave us in relation to the first of all, the interesting point for me was the type of houses that are being proposed, because people that don't know the area, a few hundred yards down the road, there's going to be 500 new houses getting built at Denlin Head Corner. This has been on the go for some considerable time, I think maybe 15 years or whatever, and it seems to be coming to fruition now. Further on, get into Banknock, we've also got another major development that was started off at 500 houses as well there. Excuse me. So we're going to have quite a bit of development going on in that area. The issue is that you stated quite clearly that an independent report had been done on the ground. Now, members that were on the site visit, I can't remember exactly who was there, would clearly say that the condition, the area that we were at, definitely wasn't arable. So I just want you to clarify again who did the report and what the outcome of the report was.
Surely, Convener, our report was taken from the Scottish Agricultural College. Right. They provided a detailed report on the quality of the ground and the possibility of it being incorporated into agricultural production.
Point is that since last year, maybe just before it, that everybody was tied up with one area in terms of development, and that was MPF4. Now, in terms of MPF4, and now you're talking about reference 16, you stated how you believed that this application would be compatible with those policies. Can you maybe just reiterate what you said on that? Because you've got to remember is, although we're maybe only giving you 10 minutes, is that we're taking notes and we're listening to the questions, but some of the important issues maybe just go by us. So in terms of this situation, I wonder if you could maybe elaborate.
Surely, Convener, I've been listening to the discussion jointly the committee have had on the previous application, and I'm sure it may come again with the next submission. NPF4 is an attempt by the Scottish Government to try and improve and streamline, if you like, the planning process, make it much simpler to understand and make it more sustainable long term. NPF4 sets out the government's policies and proposals on the use of land. Policy 16 states that development proposals for new homes that improve affordability and choice by being adaptable to changing diverse needs and which addresses identified gaps in provision will be supported. Now, that's a generalised statement. Convener, you mentioned a moment or two back the housing releases and development which is taking place in the general area. Those are specifically for family housing. What we're dealing with here is a unique group of smaller properties which would assist in terms of people choosing to downsize, and in so doing, freeing up family homes elsewhere in the existing towns and villages across Falkirk.
You used the terminology there, gaps and provisions. So would you classify this development as that?
In the context of developers providing for bungalows, I certainly would. I'm not aware of any other competitor scheme that brings forward this choice of unit so close to existing facilities in an identified, what I would call Denny Road centre. I've mentioned it's close to shops, it's adjacent to public transport facilities, and in that respect, it works everything that you would seek to achieve for a small housing release relative to this size and type of property.
Okay, that's enough for me at this stage. I'll pass on to any other members like to ask any questions of Mr. Jones at this particular stage. Anybody online? No? No? No other questions? Okay then, sir. You can retake your seat and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Back to you now. You've heard some of the questions. There wasn't an awful lot of questions, but obviously the submission for Mr. Jones. And have you anything further to add to your submission?
I have a couple of points, but I'd also like to ask Ian to come in as well on a point if
Perfect.
That's okay.
Yeah, thank you.
I would reiterate our previous comments about this principle of a housing emergency. Again, the housing emergency is related to people in acute need, homeless people, affordable housing. It's about resolving that through social housing, not mainstream private developers as proposed here. Again, I made it clear at the beginning of my presentation that this is an application for mainstream housing. That's what we need to assess it on. And I would also ask Ian if he could come in relation to the community hall contribution. I think that would need to be separate than through the planning process and probably couldn't play a role in the determination of this application. Thanks, convener.
Thank you. Through you, convener. Yes, on the point around the voluntary contribution, I don't think that would be a consideration that could be determinative in this case. That's a matter for the applicant. They've offered to provide it, but it's not part of the planning consideration before you today.
Okay, then I'm going to come in right away on relation to this. I was very interested to hear what Mr. Jones had to say. On site, I mean, I know I used to play football across the road many a time for years. I know this area very well, and in fact, one of the committee members had asked the question on site: is this greenbelt land when we're standing on this area fully all bricks and bits and people like that? So but the classification in terms of the council is that it says greenbelt. The issue is that in terms of greenbelt and material considerations that outweigh it, I think we've got quite a few. The first thing I'd like to say is that as far as the independent report is, in terms of the site, it says that they didn't think that they could be brought back to any particular use. The main issue for me is, and I went to a seminar as a convener in Edinburgh with the Scottish ministers over a year ago in relation to planning issues. Obviously, the major issue on the debate that day was MPF4. Now, the fact is that people, I think, get a bit uptight about MPF4 because it seemed to be that, oh, it's MPF4 and everything was held up. So I asked one of the questions, as I says, that one of the questions I would like to ask is the fact is that it seems to be that there's a sort of negative attitude around MPF4. I said, but is there any other avenue that you can go down in relation to negativity? And the lady, the minister, the planning minister has stated quite clearly there is a few. And the one that sticks out in my mind and has been used here today was the fact about gaps and provisions. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I've already stated to you that we've got 500 houses getting built. The planning permission was granted years ago, but it's on tap, getting built down at Denland Head. And then in Banknock, there was a proposal for another 500, and that seems to be moving as well. So there's 1,000 houses getting built, or approximately 1,000 houses there. But the gap that I'm talking about and the gap that Mr. Jones was talking about is the fact is that I don't remember the last time that we as a planning committee have sat here before and spoken about an application that's come in for what you would call specialised housing, which is small bungalows, because the fact is there's none available, and if any of them does become available, then they're taken right off the market. So we're talking about the development adaptable with gaps and provisions, and I think that fits the bill. I think in terms of MPF4 reference 16, I think it was highlighted by Mr. Jones exactly the terminology that we used. And in terms of material consideration, I believe quite clearly that this application should be supported because of the type of application it is now. I'll tell you quite clearly, if this was an application in just for housing, like the 500 houses that's going to be built down at Denland Head, then I wouldn't have a problem with this and saying, well, I think there's no really any justification for it. But because of the fact is that it's a gap in the housing market, which has been stated by the government, and in terms of reference 16, then I'm quite happy to formally move this application. Yep.
Convener, just at this point, I think it might be worth checking with planning colleagues over the exact nature of the application that's before us, appreciating your point around bungalows and specialist housing. But it's just to get clarity from colleagues that have been looking at the application in detail, if that is what the application covers and if that would be an enforceable, conditionable position to flow through to any grant of permission.
Thanks, Convener. The application is for residential development. It's not specific to a type of residential development. That's not what they've submitted. That's not what they've provided justification or evidence for. It would be incredibly difficult to word a condition that would actually be enforceable and meet the tests of conditions to ensure that specialist housing is provided. It's not clear what specialist housing is. It's not a defined term in the planning process.
But surely bungalows is specified by what we've got. We're sitting here taking all the information on board, coming for yourselves and reports. We've got the agent for the application that's sitting in front of us. He tells us quite clearly that this application is for bungalow type housing. What I'm saying to you is that I believe the MPF4 Ref 16 supports gaps in provisions, and the gap in provision, as far as I'm concerned, and the area is for that type of housing. Yes, Mr. Broadley, I'm taking any advice I can.
Sorry, through yourself, Convener, it may help. Committee and the agent mentioned it as well. It's also in the Director of Police Services report to draw members' attention to 7A20, where the specific paragraph make reference to this policy 16F. I'm aware that we do have a copy of that policy for members, which Gemma can share on the screen, and it may be appropriate through yourself, Convener, for one of my colleagues to run through that in light of specific circumstances where unallocated land can be considered to see where it sits. But that's the specific paragraph 7A20. And if Gemma could bring that up, then perhaps an officer, either Catherine or Alistair, could run through that, if that assists the committee.
Convener, I don't know if it helps, but rather than what you were talking about, it's actually varying needs housing is what the terminology is. So that all your doors are DDA and approved. So I don't know if that, I know what you were saying, and I appreciate Catherine was saying I don't recognise that. I don't know if varying needs sort of assists that a wee bit.
Fine. I think I'm being advised to take a 5-minute recess just to discuss it. If you want to take us offline then at the minute. Thank you. Okay, folks, we'll reconvene. Thank you for that period of clarification. Officers obviously have everybody's mind and obviously want to ensure that what comes forward is appropriate, professional, and so we're passing on to who at the moment? Is it Catherine? We're going back to Catherine. Okay, Catherine.
Thanks, Convener. I think I'll just go back a step and just point out that the application is for residential development. It's not for any other type of development, and that's really what we need to focus on. That's what was consulted with the neighbours and with consultees. I wonder if, Gemma, if you could put the policy up on the screen. It might be too small to see.
Well, I think we'll just go and get the telescopes.
I will read it. So this is policy 16, and it's got multiple parts. And I think perhaps, Convener, what you were looking towards was part C, which is development proposals for new homes that improve affordability and choice by being adaptable to changing and diverse needs, and which address identified gaps in provision will be supported. This could include self-provided homes, accessible, adaptable and wheelchair accessible homes, build to rent affordable homes, a range of size of homes such as those for larger families, homes for older people including supported accommodation, care homes and sheltered housing, homes for people undertaking further and higher education, and homes for other specialist groups such as service personnel. So that's one part of the policy. But on the other side, there is part F, which we've had a lot of discussions about, and that relates specifically to land which is not allocated for housing. So development proposals for new homes on land will not be allocated for housing. Sorry, land not allocated for housing in the local development plan will only be supported in limited circumstances. And we've discussed those in a lot of detail. So providing housing which is a bungalow would not meet those requirements. That isn't specific enough to meet those requirements in the development plan. And it would be difficult for us to then condition anything else on that list, because that isn't what was originally applied for and doesn't form part of the application. There are sections within that would raise questions around the equality assessment. Obviously in the report we've done a very basic one as standard, but if you're restricting it to certain types of people, then you need to do that equality assessment in more detail and measure the impacts. It's open to the applicant to come back in with an alternative scheme and a justification which covers those points.
Yeah, I can understand that, but the fact of the matter is that maybe it was the tip of the iceberg when I had mentioned what I had stated, because there were other areas that whatever was going to formally, when we're formally moving about the disused land, obviously there's no adverse impact on the existing area, and that there are other areas that believe are material considerations for this that outweigh the development plan. So the fact is that in terms of the formal move, formal motion, I would just stick with that with the added areas on, in terms of what we've said is for additional homes, smaller housing and on this disused land. I took that many notes on it, and obviously economic benefits as well. No adverse impacts on the existing community. So that's my issue as well.
Is it possible to come in?
You could come in, fine, thank you, sir.
Thank you, convener. So I think what you're saying, and you can correct me if I'm misunderstanding, is that I think you've listened to what Catherine said about policy 16C, but it's your view that there are a range of material considerations that would outweigh the development plan in this particular case. And in terms of these, I think you've noted that despite being in Greenbelt, the land is in poor condition, and I'm presuming that you would be suggesting that it would be a suitable incursion into the Greenbelt, an acceptable one. You said that there was no adverse impact on the amenity of the area. You mentioned it would make provision of additional homes. Was that in some way to try to meet housing supply? That being the case, can I suggest there's actually some wording in the judgment in the Miller Homes case, and I think it was part of the submissions by the Scottish ministers, who say that the fact a planning authority had not yet published a delivery pipeline could be presented as a material consideration to justify derogation from the development plan. I don't think in and of itself that would be sufficient to outweigh the development plan, but I bring it to your attention as it is maybe something that would add in to the consideration around providing housing, additional housing supply. I would also suggest, and it's partly to avoid creating a precedent that others may latch upon to try to, in a sense, circumvent Policy 16, but it might be worth noting that for the purposes of this application, without creating any form of precedent, it's noted that the planning authority has not yet published a delivery pipeline, and it's considered that the proposed development would benefit the supply of housing in the vicinity, something like that. I think you had alluded to the homes being proposed being of a nature that may be beneficial. So I was taking it from that you were thinking that the development, despite this not being part of the original application, but the development is proposed to contain forms of houses which would help to meet diverse housing needs and accessibility requirements. So I think that's perhaps what I was taking from it. And you also mentioned that there would be economic benefits generated by the development. I suppose, and it's not to put words in your mouth, but I think it's important to consider whether there's suitable infrastructure and the impact on infrastructure can be adequately mitigated. Would that be something that was in your mind as well? So that was my sense of from the discussion that you've just had. So could I maybe try to sort of summarise that?
Because obviously other members haven't had an opportunity to speak yet. So they've got an opportunity to speak, and it's not everybody that's maybe going to bear the same opinion as me. So do you want to reopen it up?
Just to clarify what the motion is at this stage may be helpful. So you'll expect my usual preamble, the committee having considered the officer's report, the development plan and material considerations, and having exercised its planning judgment, agrees that it is minded to grant PPP, because I think it's important to say that the report is full of references to provisions that may be in a section 75 for contributions. So I think that would be something that I would expect you would be including, but you can no doubt confirm that, as it's considered that the following material considerations are of such significant and determinative weight as to indicate that the plan should not be accorded priority. So I think I had noted the land is in a state of disrepair. But would be considered that the development would be an acceptable incursion into the green belt at this location. I have noted that you didn't consider there would be any adverse impact on the amenity of the area. You had mentioned the additional homes for the area, and that's where I had referred to what I just read out, that for the purposes of this application, without creating any form of precedent, it's noted that the planning authority has not yet published a delivery pipeline, and it's considered that the proposed development would benefit the supply of housing in the vicinity. We had noted as we were discussing there that the development is proposed, and as I say, that can't necessarily be guaranteed as it's not the original basis of the application, but that's what the developer is proposing, to contain forms of houses which would help to meet diverse housing needs and accessibility requirements, and the application would generate economic benefits for the area. So I think then moving on, there would be a consideration of grant of planning permission in principle would be subject to completion to the satisfaction of the Director of Place Services of a Section 75 planning obligation in relation to education provision, and Catherine can shout out if I'm missing anything from the report, the education provision, 15% affordable housing, play space contribution, parks, informal play and recreation contribution, and green space and green corridor contribution. Would that be right? And also a contribution towards the Den Eastern Access Road. Is that? Yeah, education was the first one. Yeah. And I think also from going through the report, there would be a range of conditions on satisfactory conclusion of the Section 75 obligation. The Director of Place Services would be authorised to grant planning permission in principle subject to conditions considered appropriate to him. And we would have specific conditions. So the conditions would include ones in relation to parking, footpath upgrades, drainage and flood risks, wet path plans for accesses, noise impact assessment, contaminated land assessment, coal mining risk conditions, ecology conditions, diversity, biodiversity enhancement plan, construction environmental management plan, tree and hedgerow protection measures, waste management plan, landscaping open space plan, energy statement and 15-metre buffer around all water courses. So apologies, that was quite long-winded and that's not been seconded yet. I think it was just maybe helpful to pull things together.
Okay then. Okay, I'm going to open it up. Councillor Kelly.
Oh, thanks. I was worried about
Sorry to keep you.
a motion going on before we actually debated it. And that was kind of worrying me a wee bit. Anyway, you mentioned that the only place building smaller houses, we don't have detailed plans yet for the 1,080 actually, because another 80 houses, another 80 down the road from the cooperative. So we don't know what size of houses they're going to be. So we can't really say because they're smaller houses, that would be a good reason to ignore the green belt. I know it's not agricultural land, but it's important to keep the green belt. It's important because communities, if we grant this area, it will make it difficult to stop further decimation of the green belt. In other words, the land adjacent to this area, well then someone will come along looking for that. How can we refuse that? Similar to what we've done the Larbert site or Stennismuir site. Carnshaw. Exactly the same. If we allow for that, then we're going to allow it to grow more and more. As I said, it's important for people that want to have a community. They don't want to be part of just a homogenous area where it's just purely houses built next to each other and they've nowhere else to go. As I say, similar to what's happened to Headamure. If you look at it now, it's just a built-up area. They've lost all their space round about them. This site is no part of the allocation of housing in LPD 2. It may be that in the next local plan incarnation, LPD 3, when the public will be able to have, and it's important, the public in Denelin Head will be able to have an input in the local consultation, and they may wish to say, yeah, that we should be housing there. But I think right now it's important that we stick to the local plan, we keep the green belt, and I hope you will all take that into consideration when you're considering this.
Okay, thank you. Oh, Billy, yeah.
I'll formally second your proposal, motion, convener. Come on now. Come on. I agree with what Mr Henderson, the points that Mr Henderson raised, and I think that the area concerned will benefit from this kind of housing, and I just hope that to be able to bring new housing of that sort to the area, I think will help tremendously. So thanks, Convener.
Yes, Convener, but I think Councillor Murtaugh's been waiting to come in for a bit longer than I have, so.
I thought she was away and she right. Councillor Murtaugh.
Thanks, Convener. No, I've been here all the time, but I've got connection issues, and I don't. So hopefully my camera will hold. It seems to make my battery go. So apologies for that. Obviously, I don't know, just during the recess, there was a discussion which could be heard within the room. Obviously, councillors online weren't able to hear that discussion, but I think it was probably reiterated the points by Catherine just as we came back. And I have to say that I wholeheartedly agree that I don't think the policy tests have been met, which would counter policy 16. And I actually think it's quite a dangerous precedent to start looking at the pipeline supply issue. I take what's written in the policy, but I'm not sure that we meet that, given we heard earlier the amount of units the officers had said that we have approved. And I think if we were to take the view that, for example, you know, we've got 3,000, just to take a number, you know, potential properties in a pipeline, and we don't know the delivery of it, that we start to you know, allocate housing that's not in a development plan, that sites are not in development plan and on the green belt on that basis, that would be very concerning to me, particularly considering some of the history of the way things have been developed around my own ward. So I'm not keen that argument is advanced at all, although I understand why it might be put down as a condition. I think I'm happy to move the officers' recommendations on the basis that there aren't, in my mind, no mitigating factors that have been listed. It doesn't mean that there couldn't be mitigating factors in a different application. That, as you say, you know, that there are an identified need or in any of the listed policies, listed exceptions, which could be considered. But at the moment, I think the policy is very tight, actually. It's clear that it doesn't meet any of those policy tests. And I think that we need to be very mindful of that as a planning committee, and make consistent decisions. And I think if there is something which comes back with a specific identified need for that type of housing, because, as I say, there is no evidence, there's simply no evidence that that sort of housing has a housing need. It might be desirable to some, but there is no evidence in any of our documentation that there is a need for that sort of housing, and there's no evidence to suggest that it would be beneficial in terms of what we would agree at a PP3 stage. So I don't think that I can't see any grounds to grant, and I will go with the officer's recommendations. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, thank you. So just clarify where we are. There's a motion moved by myself, seconded by Bailey Kerr. There's now an amendment put up by Councillor Murtaugh to agree the recommendations contained within the report. Have we got a seconder for Councillor Murtaugh? Councillor Kelly. Councillor Kelly seconding that. And now we're going to Councillor Sinclair.
Thank you, Convener. I don't want to take up too much time because I see that time's wearing on, and I think we're all getting a bit battle weary here. Just to say that I think what the point of this decision that we're making here on this application is to establish the principle of development on that particular site. We're a long way from the detailed design phase of this, and while what we've heard today from Mr. Jones, we take that information at face value that might be what's coming forward. There's no way for us as a committee to guarantee or control that is the case. So while there has been mentions of bungalows and things like that, specialised housing and so on, not all bungalows are accessible, but also we've not heard or seen anything within the report that would suggest that specialised or housing with varying needs is coming forward within the detailed design phase. And that would give me cause for concern that we're deciding something that we have no control over or have no information on. And I think that's where we stand. We have, and I think rightly so, within the updated policies within NPF 4, we have a really high bar for looking at developing within Greenbelt that's not within our current considered plans. I think it's right that we have that high bar, and I'm of the opinion that the application does not meet those tests, in a similar vein to what Councillor Murtagh had said there. I think the only thing within policy 16 that this comes close to is point F, section 2, bullet point 3, but there's a key note within there. It's a caveat that it's inclusion of within an existing settlement boundary, and this is clearly not. This would be out with and an extension to the settlement boundary of Denny Road Head. And when we talk about setting precedent, when we take the previous application, when infill was mentioned, this is not infill. This is nowhere near, other than the houses across the road. It's not an infill. It's nowhere near either or. And I think, in my mind, this, in agreeing this today, it would represent an unacceptable encroachment into the green belt. I don't think that's acceptable, but I don't think that's acceptable going forward either, unless we meet, as Councillor Murtagh has noted in her comments there, unless there's specific really high bar tests that have to all be met for us to take that into consideration. So that's my contribution to this debate, and I'll be voting as necessary. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Sinclair. Is Councillor Forrest light on?
Yes, it is. Thanks, convener. It's a long, long time since I've heard the green belt mentioned so much in any committee. I don't think I've ever heard it mentioned that much. But what we should actually remember is that the green belt is what makes Falkirk. It makes it unique. All of these communities, Denny Road Head, Polmont, West Quarter, almost anywhere. And it's all got a wee bit of greenery round about it. Very, very rarely do you run one into the other. And I think that's why people choose to live here in Falkirk. Now, if we allow developments to encroach on the green belt time after time after time, then it takes away the very reason for them to want to live here. I've heard the ground mentioned that it is very poor, but have anybody actually seen the pictures of Hawaii after the fire last year? They're all grown back. Nature has a way of doing that. And if the ground is poor, then nature will find a way of getting the plants back. And that's all I'd like to add to it. So thank you.
Enjoyed your summary there, sir. Well done. Thank you. Now, Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, convener. It's been interesting listening to everything. I know it's taken a lot longer than everybody's probably thought this report was going to take. I have got maybe a slightly different thought on this, in that, remembering this is a planning permission in principle. So we do have an opportunity to hold something to account, because it can't start to build until he's got the planning permission full, which would have to follow on from this. The question of housing of varying needs, there is a requirement for housing of varying needs. There is one of the places that Scotland, the UK, everywhere struggles with. We need more houses of varying needs. So the way I'm looking at it is, and I understand what people are talking about, the standards and things like that come forward, that can be held up if the application that come forward for full planning permission, which would be the one they can build on, if that doesn't meet it, then that can still be held to account. The agent David has said, that they'll be building basically to DDA standards, as we used to call it, and now housing for varying needs. I know this is an application for standard housing, as Catherine has said, and I accept that. But I would like to give the applicant a chance to prove that he's going to build to the housing for varying needs, because I think that's important to me on this, because I think that is relatively significant. So when I'm thinking about it, yes, I still will have a chance when it comes back as a full, and if it's not, if it comes back as standard housing or a mixture of standard housing and housing of varying needs, then that may change my opinion. But at this moment in time, I'm probably on the side of let the PPP go through, but there will be quite a lot of scrutiny on it when the full application comes back. Because, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but they can't start building on a PPP. They need a full planning permission to actually start building. So that maybe tells you where I'm going, that I'm willing to let this go, trust the applicant in this case to his word, and let's see what happens when we get the full application back.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else like to come in at this stage? Councillor Murty, want in again?
Yeah, I just want to ask some questions based on that to the officers for clarity, because I think that I have sympathy with what Councillor Boyce is saying, but I think what the officers have said previously is that they would find it difficult to condition based on a PPP for that to come back for a condition, for to say you have to come back with a type of application that meets one of these criteria, whether it's, you know, whichever of them it is. And I think that what concerns me in that is that, as we know, tomorrow is gifted to none of us, and our glorious attendance and membership of this committee is not gifted to us at all either. You know, it may well be that an application comes back out with Councillor Boyce or any of our tenure on this committee. The decision which will be made based on the conditions that are listed in the motion. And I didn't hear anything listed in the motion that said that there would have to be a particular type of housing that would meet policy test 16F.2 or whatever it is. And I want to ask officers whether there is a way of, as Councillor Boyce is suggesting, including that within a motion, because at the moment I don't think that that's what we're making a decision on.
Okay, good point again. We'll bring, who's going to come in on this one? Catherine, you've got the lucky number. Thank you.
Not feeling quite so lucky at the moment. There is no way of controlling it by condition. Certainly that would be very difficult to enforce. I don't think it would meet the tests in the circular.
Okay. Sorry, it's straightforward. I suppose the thing is that if there's no way of imposing a condition, then can we clarify then that if we pass what is in the motion, that the principle of this site being developed is what we're agreeing. So the principle of this site and any kind of housing application coming forward within Greenbelt in an unallocated site is what we're actually agreeing and being asked to agree today.
Thanks, convener. Yes, if you grant this based on the reasons that have been provided, you're granting a housing development in the countryside. It would then be open to the applicant, or if they sold the land on, someone else to submit a further application. You're not controlling the type of development beyond it being housing.
Sorry, can you clarify? So, Catherine, if that other developer submitted, because they've got to get the full permission, if they submitted that full application and it did cover, and they made it clear that it was going to be housing for varying needs, could they do that?
You mean a separate application for detailed planning permission, or a matter specified in conditions application?
So at the moment we're on a PPP.
Yeah.
So if the current applicant was to submit their full application, and part of their full application that they submitted was for houses of varying needs, I'm not saying that we have to force them to do it. What I'm saying is it's open then to the applicant to follow what he put in the presentation.
So if they have planning permission in principle, they would need to follow that up with an application to the matters specified in conditions. The permission we're discussing would be for housing, so they would be under no obligation to follow up any of these policy.
But it would be still open at that point for us to refuse it at that stage, if it didn't come back as housing for varying needs.
No, because you haven't restricted that from the planning permission in principle.
I think Bernard wants to come in here. Right, Bernard.
Thanks, Councillor House. Yeah, if planning permission in principle is granted, it's a general permission for residential development on the site. Despite what the applicant says, I mean, the site could be sold on, somebody else could take up that permission. A further application could come in, wouldn't necessarily be for varying needs housing. That application would need to be assessed on its own merits. There wouldn't necessarily be grounds at that point to refuse an application for matters specified in condition. I mean, the option is open to the applicant if they are committed to a scheme for varied needs housing. Instead of coming in with an application for planning permission in principle, they could come in with a detailed full application for that proposal. That's not what you have before you today.
Can I just say that it doesn't matter what kind of house in the building there. The fact is it's a green belt and that's what we're going to lose. So it doesn't matter if they're going to build one palace or 100 palaces. It's a green belt I'm interested in.
Okay then. You've made your position quite clear, Councillor Kelly. Thank you very much. No. We're
can I have a follow-up question just to confirm?
Right, carry on. Councillor Murtagh.
I think what is important to try and establish is if at a point then where a full planning permission comes back, that basically the grant of planning permission in principle is therefore a material consideration in that full planning, and that we or any committee at that point would not really be able to go back and reconsider the points of MPF 416F because because the committee had already decided it was a suitable area for development. And I think that being clarified, which I kind of think is what Bernard was saying, but explicitly clarified, I think is an important thing for us to understand.
Okay, I think we're all clear in our minds. No, I think you made it clear, Bernard. Made it clear. Okay, just to clarify where we are, we've got I'll come back to Councillor Murtagh. After all you've heard, Councillor Murtagh, are you still agreeing to what you had stated originally in terms of your amendment?
Yes, convener, I'm still moving the amendment based on the officer's recommendations.
Thank you very much. That clarifies the situation. Okay, I'll go back to Mr. Henderson. We've got a motion moved and seconded, and we have an amendment moved and seconded. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. You'll be grateful I won't read the full thing out, but I think I'll just try and read through my note of the material considerations that were considered to outweigh the development plan in terms of your motion as seconded by Councillor Kerr. So the site is in a state of poor repair and is also considered to be acceptable incursion into the green belt. The development is proposed by the applicant to contain forms of houses which would help to meet diverse housing needs and accessibility requirements. The committee is satisfied that the development would not have an adverse impact on the amenity of the area. The economic benefits would be generated by the development. I think one I perhaps missed the last time, but we had discussed originally was impacts on infrastructure can be adequately mitigated. And we also had, for the purposes of this application and without creating any form of precedent, it is noted that the Planning Authority has not yet published a delivery pipeline, and it is considered that the proposed development would benefit the supply of housing in the vicinity. And I think I'll just double check that that's covered off all of the points that I'd noted. Did I cover the point? Yes, I did. I did. Thank you. And that would be amended to grant planning permission in principle subject to Section 75 planning obligation to the satisfaction of the Director of Police Services and subject conditions as determined appropriate by the Director of Police Services. And I think I narrated them earlier. And we then have an amendment by Councillor Murtagh, which is seconded by Councillor Kelly. So on that basis, I would effect a roll call through names. Probus Bissett is absent today. Councillor Bowes.
Amendment.
Bailey Buchanan.
Motion.
Councillor Colley is absent. Councillor Flynn.
Motion.
Councillor Forrest.
Amendment.
Councillor Kelly.
Amendment.
Bailey Kerr.
Motion.
Councillor Murtagh.
Amendment.
Councillor Redmond.
Motion.
And Councillor Sinclair.
Amendment.
And by my counting, it is 5 votes for the amendment and 4 votes for the motion, and the amendment is accordingly carried.
Okay.
Thank you, Convener.
Thank you for that. Okay then, thank you for that. That takes us now to the last item on the agenda, and this is for a development land for use at the west of 21 Coleman Park, Coleman for Manor Forest. Now, unfortunately, officers have received information that the agent who was coming today to represent this application has been taken ill.
Convener, your microphone's not on, sir.
Oh, sorry. Okay, perfect. We'll start again. Okay, that takes us to item 9 on your agenda today. It's development of land for residential use of land to the west of 21 Coleman Park, Coleman Road for Manor Forest Limited, pages 139 to 164 in your agenda papers. Sadly, we have received, officers have received information that the agent to represent this application has been taken ill and will no longer be available to come. So it's up to members. Mr. Henderson will let you know, but I believe just to simplify it, it's up to the members here to decide whether we have a continuation to allow this gentleman to come forward. Yep.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, indeed, we've had a communication from the applicant's agent in this case, and also the applicant themselves requesting that this matter be continued. The applicant's agent had made a deputation request, as you would see on your agenda papers, to be heard by the committee. However, he has, it would appear, quite genuinely been incapacitated at short notice. So he's requested, on the basis that there have been various exchanges, as is noted. I'll just read out the rest of the communication. So this is verbatim from the applicant's agent. There have been various exchanges with the planning officer since the hearing on various issues. The specifics and the proposed reasons for refusal 3 and 5 were not discussed at the hearing, nor subject to any cross-examination by members. The applicant considers it necessary that I be heard on these specific matters, and I agree. The application has been under consideration for almost 4 years, so continuation until the next meeting for 4 weeks should not prejudice anyone. I would greatly appreciate if members could continue this application. So that's the end of the communication. So as the convener has noted, in much the same way as it's for members of the committee to decide whether or not to agree to hear a deputation. In any event, it's now for members of the committee to decide whether or not to agree the procedural step of continuing consideration of this application until the February meeting of the Planning Committee. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, then how do you... Pardon? Yes.
Yes, sorry. The applicant has stated that he wants it done at the next meeting. How do we feel about that? Because at the end of the day, it's the council that sets the agenda, and we're the ones that may step back and allow him extra time.
Through you, Convener, yes, well that's quite correct, Councillor Forrest, which is why it's a decision to be taken by the committee. Continuations in themselves are not entirely unusual and often take place for site visits. It's less common for continuation for a deputation, although I am conscious that that has happened over the last 6 months, at least on one occasion. So ultimately, I think I'm in the hands of the committee to decide whether or not to, I'll not use the word continue, but proceed with determination of the matter at this meeting, or if you wish to agree with the applicant's request to continue to the next meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson. It was actually more the timescale. When would we actually have a space for that on our timetable? Because we have, you can see by today's agenda how many items that we're going through, and there's no guarantee that we'll have a space in 4 weeks' time.
Well, I think the main decision, first of all, is whether we're going to agree a continuation in the first place, and then it will be up to officers then to find when they can get it on the agenda. So I'm going to ask everybody what they feel about a continuation. I'm quite happy for a continuation. I'll go to Councillor Kelly. What do you think, sir?
I'm happy to go for a continuation.
Councillor Kerr, Bailey Kerr.
I'm quite happy for that.
Councillor Bowes.
I had my on, Convener, so I don't have any choice. I think the perception of putting a meeting back so that another councillor can make his presentation, which is what we did, which, as you know, I disagreed with.
Aye.
If we then don't do that here, then we'll be perceived to have been given the councillor more leeway than an applicant. So I don't think we have any choice but to give them it.
Fine. Councillor Sinclair?
No dissent here.
Councillor Forrest?
Nor here. I will agree with that.
Councillor Murtagh? Councillor Murtagh?
Happy to continue. Yeah, I'm happy to continue it. Thank you.
Councillor Redmond?
Right, happy to continue it.
Councillor Flynn?
Happy to continue.
But whenever officers can get the space on the agenda. Other than that, thank you, everybody. It's been a long day, but it's been a very, very, very good day. Thank you very much. Safe journey home.
Thanks to the chair.